Okay, here we are talking about Acts chapter 17. Moving right along, not doing too bad. I don't know how many weeks this has been, but we're going to finish probably in less time than we did it when I did it the first time in 2006, when I think we were at it for 2.5 years. I don't think we're 2/3 of the way through now, right? Roughly. There's 28 chapters, so somebody else can do the math. But we're in the middle of Paul's second missionary journey, which was an accident, was not intended by Paul. His plan was, of course, to head through Asia. Let's get the little thingamabob here. So I stopped pointing at the overhead. I mean, at the video. Okay. This is Asia. That's what he intended. So he probably was just going to extend his mission across South Galatia and then into Asia. But God had different plans, and we know that because God said so. He told Paul that, at least Paul. So they did this, went around Asia. They specifically avoided. God didn't say, hey, just march right straight through Asia and come out the other side on Troas. He made him go around Asia at the top, and then to Troas, and then they boarded a ship, went across the Aegean Sea and landed in Neapolis, and then their first real stop was Philippi, where they promptly encountered conflict. And so they leave Philippi and they go to Thessalonica, right here, where there's so much conflict and potential threat to Paul that they send Paul away out of Thessalonica, and he ends up in Athens, which is the story that we're going to read today in chapter 17. So everything that's happening right now is, I've used the analogy, the history of redemption often looks like bumper cars. There just doesn't seem to be any pattern to it. It just, the circumstances happen, and the gospel spreads and churches are built and so forth. But it may look like bumper cars on the ground, but from a sky high view, it is a masterpiece, a mosaic of divine artistry. So that's what we're seeing here. So they would probably, they're going to go to these cities. I think both Philippi and Thessalonica are Roman colonies. Athens is practically independent because of its stature. Corinth is, I believe. And so, he's making his way through these major cities of the Roman Empire. He's not stopping in backwaters. When he ends up in a backwater, it's usually because he got chased out of someplace. Berea might be one. I don't know. I don't know anything about Berea. It's just part of the story that we've already read. So, all right.
It's interesting that the church grows fastest during conflict and not during prosperity.
Yeah. So this is going to happen real quick here. They've been in Philippi. I got ahead of myself. They've been in Philippi, and now he's going to continue down through Thessalonica, Berea by accident, and then Athens by accident. Maybe by the time he gets to Corinth, he's doing that on purpose, but these are just circumstantial. So we're right here in this part of the missionary journey. He doesn't spend much time in Thessalonica because he can't, because there's so much hostility from the Jews. But it's interesting, he developed a really close relationship with that church. If you read the two books to the Thessalonians, we'll look at a little bit of it today. So let's go ahead and continue on here. All right, let's do 1 through 10. Now, when they had traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia, I don't know how to say that. You can hear the gods in these names of everything frequently. Where there was a synagogue of the Jews, so there it is again. And according to Paul's custom, there it is again, he went to them and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the scriptures. There it is again. explaining and giving evidence that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and saying, this Jesus whom I am proclaiming to you is the Christ. So there you have a very concise statement, snapshot of Paul's pattern and the nature of his preaching to the Jews. Their stumbling block, their hang up, all of them, including the apostles before the resurrection of Jesus, was precisely that statement right there, that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead. That was the stumbling block. And you see it, let me get back to, you see it revisit it one more time. I got a map of, I did an image search of Thessalonica. We'll look at that in a second. No, this thing is in the way. Okay, so this is after the resurrection. It's the famous story. Sometimes I think people miss the point of it, because the point of it is here in, he's not just comforting two disciples. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do with this in terms of speaking. But this is, to me, the essence of the point, because it's the essence of the, it's the essence of the ministry. It's the essence of the plan of God and the purpose for which the Son of God came to earth. And that is the statement here. And it is also the gospel itself. And he says it in verse 25, well, foolish men and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and to enter into his glory? That is exactly what Luke says here. Essentially, this is a roundabout expression again. To enter into his glory is a roundabout way of saying rise from the dead and be exalted. Then beginning with Moses and with all the prophets, he explained to them the things concerning himself in all the scriptures. So then Luke shows Paul doing exactly what Jesus did, and for exactly the same message in the same way that he did, proving from the scriptures, like Jesus just did, that the Christ, before he could take his throne, the path to exaltation had to pass through the cross, the crucifixion. And that was the stumbling block for the Jews, because what on earth is a crucified Messiah is an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms. And so they couldn't make sense of it. And they're not making sense of it here either, because they're going to chase him out of Thessalonica. Luke chapter 24, powerful thing. It lays the groundwork for the preaching of Paul's gospel, even though Paul doesn't appear in the book of Luke. He's around somewhere. Remember that. He was in Jerusalem, so we don't know where he was. And shortly after the resurrection, he was there to oppose the mission of the apostles. So he was somewhere close by when Jesus was being tried and crucified. So what he knew about that, we don't know. But anyway, there's your gospel essence spoken of right out of the mouth of Jesus to two disciples who didn't understand it. Wrap your head around that. These made strange Christians, did they not? These Christians who didn't believe that Jesus would die, who didn't believe that his death would be payment for sin and overturn 1,400 years of tradition about sacrifices and the Day of Atonement and so forth. There's no difference. I mean, they didn't understand it. They didn't believe it because they didn't understand it. And the only thing that was going to change their minds was to see it happen. And that's why you see the buzz of activity after the resurrection and not before it. At any rate, they didn't believe in his death. They didn't believe he would die. They didn't believe his death would atone for sins. They didn't believe he would rise from the dead. And yet, here they are, disciples. So I'm just thinking through that. I don't know what the pastor thinks about this, but that's how I read the system. I mean, I read the story. And he takes great pains after He takes great pains after his resurrection to make sure that these people truly understand the gospel and his mission. And it's going to take a while. And it's going to take beyond the day of Pentecost and being filled with this and the outpouring of the Spirit in chapter 2 and right into chapter 10. And it's not going to, I mean, it's not even going to be the outpouring of the Spirit on Peter in chapter 2 that's going to change his mind about the Gentiles. It's going to be the outpouring of him witnessing the outpouring of the Spirit on the Gentiles. That's going to change his mind. So he needed both of those things and to see both of those things along with the Samaritans in between.
I think it's kind of interesting just to, as far as like American churches today should probably be teaching more like reasoning, just because you see it here and in Acts, like every time Paul goes to the Jews, like every time he goes to a synagogue, it says he reasoned with them the
Yes.
scriptures. He didn't just tell them the scriptures, but he reasoned.
Yeah, and you can often read that argued with,
Yeah,
disputed with, or something like that.
debated.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, it's just kind of interesting because it seems like, unfortunately, a lot of places are like, well, why do you believe this? Well, because it says so. Well, why does it say so? Well, because, it's a lot of circular logic. And so it's good to do stuff like this. And
Why do
figure out the reason.
why do most people believe in evolution?
'Cause
Why
it
do most
says
people
so.
who believe in evolution and who also think you're stupid for believing in creation believe in evolution?
Because the book says.
Because they said so. Yeah. Why do you believe there are 9 planets orbiting our sun? Make it 8, depending on. Why did you change your mind from 9 planets to 8 planets?
Yeah.
Well, they told us,
Yeah.
that there's, we told you before there's 9. Okay, I'll believe there's 9. Now we're telling you there's 8. Oh, okay, I'll believe there's 8.
Yeah.
And if tomorrow they go back to 9, we'll all believe that we're back to 9. Yeah.
No, Pluto's still a planet.
Huh?
Pluto is still a planet.
Yeah, there's a Big Bang Theory episode about that. Yeah. Sheldon is angry at Neil deGrasse Tyson. Was it Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Yeah.
Because he's the one who disputed the planet. He's the one that got it overturned, and Sheldon really liked Pluto. So he met Neil deGrasse Tyson, and all he could do was yell at him because he dethroned Pluto from being a planet.
To be fair, if I know Neil deGrasse Tyson, I'd probably yell at him too.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. So at any rate, I think it's important when you as you go through these narratives in Luke and Acts, as they weave together, you can see how they sort of circle back. It circles back on itself, and you can see that right here with almost exactly the same words. So
And in fact, you can't just leave it set there just because they said so. Because then you take a look at our conviction that there is a God, that there is a Christ who died, that he is who he says he is, because we have evidence. We can't just, and it's interesting how God, Romans 1:18 says that every man sees creation and comes to the conclusion that there is a supreme being. That is more than just somebody said so.
yeah, it's self. I think this would be Alvin Plantinga. I don't know if you know him. He's one of the great philosophers of the 20th century. He's also an evangelical Christian, a philosopher, professor at Notre Dame. Very hard to understand, but he would say that belief in God is self-evident. It needs no argument. I don't need to give any argument, evidentiary argument. I don't need to give any argument to justify my belief in God. He believes that it's basically, he uses the term properly basic.
But
I don't know the
thing
difference.
is that it's not just because somebody says so.
No, that's right.
God.
If you never
works
hear-
in it.
If you never hear anything about God whatsoever, the heavens cry out that there is one, and that holds you accountable.
And he is the one. We believe that there's 9 planets or 8. Somebody said so. God is a different story.
That's right.
We are convinced because of the working of God in the hearts of believers and unbelievers.
Yes. Yeah, he has imprinted his presence on the universe. The creator imprinted his presence on the creation without at the same time being of the creation. And that's also what makes the incarnation, in my view, the greatest event in the history of the world. Because God masterfully, the creator masterfully incarnated as a man and was with the creation without at the same time being of the creation. He himself was not he was with creatures, but he was not himself. He was not the creator. Well, that's exactly the part that I would dispute. The creator became
To some extent.
Something.
I understand.
Yeah, it's almost as hard to understand as the Trinity itself. What's that?
Romans calls it he's created in the likeness of man.
In the likeness of man, that's right.
Sinful man, yet without sin.
Yeah, so maybe maybe you have a point. That's right, yeah. He was created,
Wasn't part of the creation in terms of.
yes. Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, it's so easy to go off the rails, like with Trinitarian thinking. You can just go, it has no analogies. It's an utterly unique event that will never be repeated. All of history was pointing to that moment of incarnation, and all of history looks back on that moment of incarnation, never to be repeated.
Not to mention the sovereignty of God moving the cosmos efficiently to be able to fulfill 351 prophecies that were written
Yes.
hundreds of years, like Psalms 22 talking about Jesus being crucified 700 years before crucifixion was invented. Whoa, that is insane.
And my guess is we flatter, what's that? It's almost like he planned it. But I think we flatter ourselves in thinking that we've got the wisdom to etch out, to pull out of that all of the prophecies.
Yeah.
So we come up with a list. You know, God has his list. What is the likelihood that he's going, yeah, oh, look at that, our lists are the same.
Yeah.
Right? Our lists and God's lists are never the same about anything at all. You know, oh, what did God teach you this week? Oh, well, he taught me this, this, and this. So he's got his list. Oh, look at that. Oh, she nailed it. That's exactly what I taught her, those three things and only those three things, you know. What? I'm picking on one. You just say, these are the things I learned this week. You know, I think it's perfectly, what?
Probably a lot of things.
Yes, I think it's perfectly valid to do that. I'm just kind of picking on it a little bit because it's just that we tend to think that we've got some kind of line on what God is up to. And I don't think that if these guys didn't, you know, Peter and James and Paul, I mean, Paul was going to go to Asia, you know, so God, he had to get at least two visions from God, three visions from God to keep him on the path that God wanted him on. So anyway, yeah. Okay, where was I? I'm not blaming it.
That's three highlighted, we're at least past three.
It was necessary that God had to suffer.
Right.
That's why I came to this.
That's where I was.
Yeah, so we're at 4.
I'm gonna blame Brian for all of that. Brian, it's all, that 12 minutes we'll never get back, and it's all your fault.
I'm here happy because of that.
No, that was a good discussion. I mean, I've repeated myself in all of it. I've said all of that stuff before. By the way, I repeat myself self-consciously. I know I'm doing it as I'm doing it. I'm well aware of it because there are certain things that I think you need to keep in front of people. Hopefully those are the ones that I'm doing.
Well, the Bible repeats for emphasis.
It does all the time.
It's a good thing to follow.
Yeah, Luke does it right here, proving that the Christ had to suffer and rise. All right. Oh, you're being optimistic because I haven't even touched my notes yet.
Done with 3.
So here's
We didn't even look at pictures of Thessalonians.
here's Thessalonica. Yeah, how would you like to live? And we're going to look at Athens if we get there, but this is just extraordinary.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. It's still.
They were
safe.
masters of engineering.
And we just kind of forget that because.
I can't keep the roots out of my drain line. My house is 40 years old. If I let it go, it would have stopped. It would have stopped functioning 20 years ago. So there would be nothing left of that pipe 1,000 years from now. It might be pieces of plastic down there, but that's all that'll be left. These roads that these people built 2,000 years ago, they still walk on.
And have less potholes in Michigan.
The aqueduct in Rome. Isn't there an aqueduct in Rome that's still an active aqueduct? That's a hard thing to say. Active aqueduct. Say that 3 times. Active aqueduct. All right, anyway, all right. So anyway, yeah. So here you can see something more medieval right here, mixed in with the other, with stuff. So the stuff that's 1,000 years old mixed in with stuff that's 2,000 years old. And
Well, you see the skyscrapers in the back there on the third.
yeah, it's just incredible. And my guess is that some of this stuff will be around long after
level.
some of that stuff. It's just incredible. There's an amphitheater. This arch, these incredibly strong arch systems that they engineered. Really amazing. What else we got here? Look at that. Look at that one right there. That's incredible. Those arches are still there. You'd think there's no way in the world. Look at that right there.
There's a McDonald's there.
Right there. Unbelievable. The Romans had a rule for the engineering of these things that when they built the bridge, Arch Bridge, the engineer had to stand under the bridge the first time people started using it. That's skin in the game. That is eating your own cooking. So you build that bridge good because the first person it's going to fall on is you. All right.
I always want to go visit those places with all those so old,
Yeah.
like things still there.
Yeah, I'm sure that one of the things that is a thing is people do this trek here
Yeah.
all the way around and visit all these places. You have to plug in a lot of gaps because we don't know exactly where he preached, where the synagogues were or anything like that. But
Yes, wouldn't go through most of that area.
okay,
I'd love to go see it. I don't really wanna-
so this is the they here are Paul, Silas, and Timothy. Luke doesn't record any ministry, any preaching in Amphipolis or Apollonia. That doesn't mean he didn't Apollonia. I don't have any idea how to say that, except that it's got Apollos in it. And they're not mentioned in Paul's letters. So we got 2 letters from Paul to the Thessalonians, even though he didn't spend much time there. It is and was the chief city of Macedonia. It's got a shortened name now. I don't remember what it's like Salonika or something like that. They've truncated it, but still there, still the chief city over there. It wasn't Philippi. And according to Paul's custom, he went and reasoned with them over 3 Sabbaths. So he's 3 weeks there. Paul's custom on Cyprus, Salamis, the city in Antioch, Iconium, and now Thessalonica, specifically mentioned. The first place that he went is synagogue. So either Luke leaves it out sometimes and doesn't say that he went into the synagogue, or there's some of these cities simply don't have synagogues. But you don't want to make the argument from silence that if it doesn't say that Paul went to the synagogue, there wasn't one, or he didn't go to the synagogue.
From the Johanna stories that we have read, that was like this first
It is. It tends to be the case that when Luke tells the story, when Luke recounts him going to a synagogue, there's conflict. And so we may be, except for Berea, but it's not mentioned in Berea, I don't think. We'll get to that in a minute. But so that could be the thing that he's really pointing out the hostility that Paul is continually receiving as he makes his way around the empire. So the hostility is spread from Jerusalem. It's everywhere he goes. Among the synagogues, among the Jewish populations, they're no more. That's wrong. A large cross section of it is no more welcoming to the idea of a crucified Messiah than the authorities were in Jerusalem, up to and including the desire to kill him, which isn't done yet. We've already had one plot right after in chapter 9, not right after his conversion, but in chapter 9 when he goes back to Jerusalem after his conversion. There's a plot to kill him. And the plot to kill him at the end of the book is the thing that's going to send him to room. Okay. Huh. So let's see. And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas. No mention of Timothy here, although he's around, along with a large number of the God-fearing Greeks and a number of the leading women. That's a recurring theme in Acts. Aristocratic or higher social status women coming to the gospel through the synagogue. God-fearing women of higher status take that additional step of belief in the crucified, resurrected Messiah in the person of Jesus, because that's really all you need. And dive right in. And you see, we heard one of one last chapter, Lydia, or the Lydian woman, the Lydian. But the Jews becoming jealous and taking along some wicked men from the marketplace, rabble, I think, how's it in King James? Some rabble from the marketplace, I forget how it says, formed a mob and set the city in an uproar, attacking the house of Jason, whom we never heard of before. They were seeking to bring them out to the people. So apparently that's where Paul was staying with this converted Jew. I'm assuming he's at his house. Now, immediately Jason becomes a target of hostility because of Paul. So boy, we like to just go home after our conversion and celebrate or have dinner. These guys, they had a tough go of it. When they did not find them, they began dragging Jason and some brethren before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have upset the world have come here also, and Jason has welcomed them. And they all act contrary to the decrees of Caesar." So there it is. These are the Jews accusing other Jews of being treasonous, which was the accusation of the Jews against Jesus before Pilate, saying that there is another king, Jesus. That is correct. They are doing all of that. I'm sorry, they are doing some of that. Paul is going to dispute the acting contrary part. What are the decrees of Caesar here that he's acting contrary to? And there's no statement about that. But at any rate, they stirred up the crowd and the city authorities who heard these things. And when they have received a pledge from Jason and the others, they released them. So Jason now becomes accountable for Paul basically leaving the city.
That statement that Jesus is, that there is another king, Jesus, to some extent, they have caused the resurrection of Christ right there, just by saying he's another king.
Yeah, that's what they're leaving out. It's interesting. They're leaving out the resurrection. So they're disputing with Paul the crucified Messiah. But when they go to the authorities, this is what they do in Jerusalem, right? It's blasphemy. He's convicted of blasphemy before the Sanhedrin. Jesus is, the council. But they don't go to Pilate with the charge of blasphemy. Pilate doesn't care about that. Pilate will give the same response that Gallio will give in a little bit. I don't care about your religious disputes. Get away from me. Good. And as it says, he's going to drive them away from the judgment seat. So they charge him with blasphemy and convict him of blasphemy before the council, but before the Romans, it's
What I'm saying is that they say he's another king. If I were the people, I'd say, where is he? If he's another king, where is he?
yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, and maybe so you're the city authority and they're going, so you're accusing them of being loyal to a dead king,
What does that have to do with
a man who was never king and who is now dead.
Yeah.
So
That seems
maybe
kinda weird.
maybe that's why they just make Jason become responsible. Let's just get him out of the city, so the city will calm down and we won't have the Romans on us, which is a concern. And the Jews know this. Acting contrary to the decrees of Caesar is not something the city authorities don't want that getting back to Rome. That the leading city of Macedonia, the city authorities of the leading city of the authorities of the leading city of Macedonia are going light on a person acting contrary to the decrees of Caesar in somebody claiming to be a king. And the city authorities have no choice but to do something because they don't want the Romans out. Maybe something like that's going on. At least it sounds reasonable as I say it out loud. So the Jews, this is common, the Jews are outraged that Paul is basically siphoning off God-fearing Gentiles from the synagogue. Which if they hang around, they're going to change the nature of the synagogue. Because the God-fearing Gentiles who become Christians, they're still going to go to the synagogue. And so now they've got these Gentile Christians in the synagogue with them. And they don't want that either. So there's an infection. It's like a pathogen that's entered the synagogues that infects only the synagogues, right? Goes and looks for synagogues and infects them. That's the pathogen of Christianity. Really, it's the antibody, and he's also converting Orthodox Jews. And by doing that, he's converting the synagogue itself. So it's possible that Paul was practically taking over these synagogues with these Christians.
Because their scripture was
That's a good point. Because the synagogue became Christian. Because their scriptures were fulfilled. And they were every bit as Orthodox Jews now as they were before they believed in Christ. Paul was an Orthodox Jew before and after his conversion.
He called himself like a Jew among Jews.
That was before, though.
No.
But nothing changed. The scriptures are fulfilled. So it's not like they stopped being Jews.
Well, that's what they said they were looking for.
Yeah, and that's the tragedy. They missed it. You talking about the Jews? Yeah, that's the tragedy. Paul talks about that. Maybe we'll look at a couple of those places next week or something.
It also says that the Jews were jealous.
Jealous, yes.
They didn't do it out of, it's not pleasing the Lord God.
That's right.
And doing it.
Exactly like with the Jews in Jerusalem.
The argument that Paul uses is most finding in the book of Matthew. Because there, Matthew is even arguing that Christ fulfilled all the scriptures. And he is the Son of God.
Yeah, Matthew's gospel is the gospel of fulfillment. There's that the scripture might be fulfilled over and over again. Although I don't really, other than Isaiah 53, I don't really know of any place where it talks about where it implies a suffering Messiah. Isaiah 42, 53, and there's one other place, 9 maybe, are the chapters that bring together these ideas, the idea of a suffering servant and a Messiah, and they come together in Isaiah like that, and it becomes the same person. And that's the
Abraham and Isaac. Where Abraham up on the mountain, God will provide land.
Yeah.
To some extent, it's there.
Yeah. Although interestingly, Isaac is never mentioned as a type of Christ by any New Testament author, even though the story comes up in Hebrews, I think. It's kind of interesting to me. But we should talk about that sometime.
Would you count Psalms 22 as this reference?
I don't know. That's a good question. Well, okay, so there'd be a couple of places. So they can be forgiven, I guess, for not understanding the suffering Messiah, the crucified Messiah. But you can't even get you don't even get a crucified Messiah out of that. You get just a suffering Messiah.
Out of which one?
22.
I mean, it talks about his hands and feet being pierced,
Oh, yeah, I got, okay.
and they.
Yeah, okay. So there's a couple of places, I guess there's a couple of places where, but it's like resurrection. You will search far and wide for references to the resurrection of the dead in the Old Testament. There's a couple of them. There's only one clear, and that's in Daniel. And then there's Job, and then it's like, that's it. But it's not all over the place. It's elusive. These is progressive revelation. And really it's revelation by reflection. Like I've said before, the fact that we understand that Jesus' death atoned for sins is not in the Gospels. It's not even in Acts. It was an act of, we know that because by an act of supernatural revelation, God revealed it to certain people and they wrote about it, like in Romans. That's how we know that stuff. Otherwise, we wouldn't know. We're not going to get it we wouldn't get it out of the Gospels any more than out of the life and ministry of Jesus any more than Peter, James, and John did. That's my view on that. Anyway, why it was written like that is interesting. I don't know the answer to that question. The gospel he says it right here. The gospel in Acts is that which you're looking at there in verse 2. It is a crucified and risen Messiah who will return again to judge the living and the dead. All in all, the city authorities probably acted pretty prudently. I don't know. So they sent Paul and Silas to at night, safety. And when they arrived, they went to Berea, down a ways. We'll look at it in a minute. And they went into the synagogue of the Jews. Here we are again. So let's go back and look at some stuff from. I didn't even read that. Sorry, you were reading it up on the board there, verse 10. I don't know why I'm including that. Oh, whatever. I'm gonna stop talking to myself out loud. So let's look. All right. First Thessalonians. Oops. So here's his letters to the Thessalonians. Here's his testimony about their situation. You turn to God from idols to serve a living and true God. So that's traditional Orthodox Jewish teaching right there, right? All of the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens and the earth. Is it Psalm 96, verse 5? Somebody can look that up if you want. I think it's Psalm 96, verse 5. One of the great statements of the definitive difference between the idols of the nations and the only God who is in that idea that he is the creator. And
for all the gods and the people or idols, the Lord made the heavens.
there you go. There's the difference. That's the great trump card. So those are dead idols. He is the living and true God, and to wait for his son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead. There it is again. That is Jesus, who rescues us from the wrath to come. Another fantastic roundabout expression for salvation in the future. We are saved from a wrath to come. So there's a mention of Macedonia and Achaia, which is to the south. Chapter 2, just look at a couple of these. Verse 5. We never came with flattering speech, as you know, nor with a pretext for greed. God is witness, nor did we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, even though as apostles of Christ we might have asserted our authority. We proved to be gentle among you as a nursing mother tenderly cares for her own children. Having so fond an affection for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become very dear to us. It's good stuff. Let's see here. The suffering which he received and they were going to receive. You, brother, became imitators of the churches of God in Christ Jesus that are in Judea. There's that bond created by a common suffering. For you also endured the same suffering at the hands of your own countrymen, even as they did from the Jews, who both killed the Lord Jesus and the prophets and drove us out. They are not pleasing to God, but hostile to all men, hindering us from speaking to the Gentiles so that they might be saved. And what happened in Thessalonica is a textbook case of this. They drove them out. They drove them out of the city. We wanted to come to you, I, Paul, more than once. The we here is Paul, Silas, and Timothy. Yet Satan hindered us. And I have to go look at the map of the third journey. Did he visit Thessalonica on the third journey? I don't remember. Anyway, Thessalonica. So there's a cost here that we can't quantify. They were under intense pressure to conform to the social norms, right? And that had an economic component, because if you don't conform, they could be punitive. You could have social ostracism, job loss, legal troubles. You know, if you weren't, especially if you weren't a Roman. So this could be a lot of cost here. The writer to Hebrews hints at some of that in chapter 6, right after the apostasy part, the sufferings that they endured. So that's Thessalonica. Brethren immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea. Don't mention Timothy yet. And when they arrived, they went into the synagogue of the Jews. Same deal. 14. These were more noble-minded than those in Thessalonica, for they received the word of God with great eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see whether these things were so. And of course, we don't have to speculate on what they were examining the scriptures for. It was that the Christ had to suffer and rise from the dead. My point in saying that is, don't sort of reduce this message down to the atoning death of Jesus. It was more than that. That's a component, but it's much more than that. And these people are focused on this idea of a suffering and risen Messiah. That was their hang up. And that's what they needed. That's the great hurdle to get over. I mean, you're never even going to get to the atoning death if you can't get past the suffering Messiah. So, yeah. Therefore, many of them believed, along with a number of prominent Greek women. There it is again. And men, the prominent Greek women, so women of higher social status. But when the Jews at Thessalonica found out that the word of God had been proclaimed by Paul and Berea also, they came there as well, agitating and stirring up the crowds. So they're hounding Paul, basically. So we can understand why in this letter here, where his hostility comes from. He got a hard time from them when he got to Macedonia. And he didn't even want to go there. He's going to go to Asia. So, yeah, that's interesting.
Are these the same, like the same people from Thessalonica that like followed them to Berea?
Yes, that's what it says. Yeah. Yeah. Verse 13, when the Jews at Thessalonica found out, they went there and agitated and stirred up the crowds. They did the same thing in Berea that they did in.
Not even in their city. Not even
Yep.
there. I think him not wanting to go to Macedonia ties into like really God's providence. I was reading through that New Testament history by F.F. Bruce, and whenever he is in house imprisonment by Felix, it says with Macedonia, that area in Achaia, many of the people there were wealthy. And since he mentioned in his defense before being house arrested that he had collected alms from the poor, Felix assumed that he would have a lot of money.
That's right.
God. So I mean, it's just interesting. Once again, we'll get there, weeks from now, but how that providence lays out. Because Paul's like, well, I don't know why I want to go here. I don't want to go here. And then turns out, like a few chapters later, that saves his bacon because he's able to, be relatively free for 2 years and talk to Felix.
Yeah. Now, he is going to be in Rome at a bad time to be in Rome.
Yeah.
Because in 64, which is just a couple of years after him arriving at Rome, there's going to be a big fire. And Nero, who he was the Caesar, Nero was, that he was looking for protection from. There's going to be a fire, and Nero, it seems that the scapegoat is going to be the Christians. And as a consequence to all that, there's going to be a lot of executions. And church tradition, we'll get there, but church tradition is that that's where Paul met his end. He never made it out of Rome. Okay. So they can't stay in Berea. Immediately, the brethren, verse 14, sent Paul out to go as far as the sea or by the sea, and Silas and Timothy remained there. So Silas and Timothy remained in Berea. and then they send Paul out. Those who escorted Paul brought him as far as Athens. Receiving a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they left. So Paul is now in Athens. That Berean synagogue seemed to have a pretty thriving Gentile component. So you can see how this would cause an uproar among the Jews, right? I mean, it literally changes, it's like an infiltration, literally transforms the worship. It transforms the whole thing. We're going to read about one of these Thessalonians, Sopater, fine Roman name, accompanied Paul on his final journey to Jerusalem along with Aristarchus and Secundus, who were from Thessalonica. I think Sopater is going to be, is he already mentioned? No, he's coming up. Sopater is in Athens. No, he's not. Is he mentioned here? Sopater? Whatever, I don't care. He made some converts and they're gonna accompany him to Jerusalem at the end. So he's very loyal following. He had disciples and those disciples were very loyal. So the Jews in Pisidian Antioch, remember on the first journey, they did exactly the same thing, right? They have a pattern too. So, whoops. Right. So when he was in Pisidian Antioch, the Jews chased him out and he went to Iconium. The Jews chased him out. Then he went to Lystra and the Jews hounded him there. And that's how he ended up in Derbe.
It's like they're just camping nearby now.
Yeah, follow him all over the place. Yeah.
And they're also working for God in this process, in that they chase him to a new city. To do what? Go to the
Yeah, that's
synagogue.
right. Yeah, and in a consequence of the conflict, he ends up, all they really do is end up spreading the gospel to more and more cities.
That's the point.
Okay. We'll go ahead and stop there. Timothy's going to end up, there is verse 15. I'll probably clean it up, but Timothy's going to end up back in Thessalonica.
We have Paul and Athens.
And we're going to have Paul in Athens, yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about that, what they often call the Sermon on Mars Hill, which, as usual, the conventional wisdom is not quite.
Can we give the mouse to Jeremiah?
So I'm going to go ahead and shut the feed down. So thanks for joining. See you later.